Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call this Intergovernmental Legislative Relations Committee meeting to order. We have a somewhat long agenda today, so we're going to jump right into item A on the agenda, which is the post-23 legislative session report from the city and consultant lobbying team. We're going to go to Mr. Padilla first for a capital outlay update.
What we'll start doing too soon is we want to start working with council staff to start getting together and make sure that the material that we take up to Santa Fe looks good for everybody and we're all everybody's in agreement. So just kind of looking at design stuff like that for now. We of course have to wait until the legislation is passed by council to fill in all the blanks and to do those things, but wanted to start working with staff right now to get that in place so that everybody knows what's happening. We've got the information back from the state that shows the grants and who actually gave in those grants. So we're going to be updating that one map that I showed. And so that we have that information. I've been working with Sean Maiden on that. He's been very helpful in compiling all that information. So we should have that done soon. Another thing, I don't know if that's pretty much my update now when it comes to capital. I don't know if you guys have any other questions on capital. Just looking, like I said, looking to start the process for next year. The one thing I will say is that we were looking at the reports from LFC and they look like the amount of revenue that the state is receiving is up about 30% year over year. So I would expect that the capital program would stay about the same or possibly grow a little bit. But that's the only other piece of information that I have right now.
Thanks, Mr. Padilla. Any questions on, and we did have sent out with the agenda, the spreadsheets that showed all of the capital outlay, had it broken out by district. Are there any questions or comments?
Well, Madam Chair, just real quick, Mr. Thompson was supposed to be on. He hasn't come on yet. What he's going to talk about, maybe Isaac could fill in, a lot of money, we're starting to get more money because of the excess of money. There's more money being distributed through the junior bill and the House bill too, that is not part of capital outlay. And so that's creating, I think Mr. Thompson was going to talk a little bit about not problems, but new ways that they have to be figured out how to do things on the front end. And that partly has to do is how do you begin connecting up with the legislators, since this is not something where a particular legislature sponsors it, it's put into a bill. It has to be done a little bit different than capital outlay. I think the example we would give this year was the funding for UNSER. The chair of the Transportation Committee put in money for capital outlay. The transportation money put in all their money for House Bill 2 for special projects. But it wasn't like the project came out like X dollars for UNSER and Paseo. Instead, when it went to Senate, it got changed. And so it came out as more the highway department may give money to these list of projects, which means now the city has to go and apply. So what that kind of told us was that when we're thinking of House Bill 2 or junior money, that we have to try to begin working with the bureaucracies in the state that it may end up with, and kind of figure out what's their program for how they're distributed. So it's just issues like that. And also we said some of the exactly how the I think with the legislators too, they're still kind of figuring out too, since there's a lot of additional money going into House Bill 2, is what he was explaining, was that exactly how they're going to appropriate it. And I see Joe's on. Joe, did you want to go ahead and carry forward?
Hang on, Mr. Minicucci, I'm gonna go back. I don't know if anybody else had questions, but I had a couple of comments for Mr. Padilla on the capital outlay that we had. So I heard that you said, Mr. Padilla, that we were gonna kind of come up with a format for kind of one pagers on each of the capital outlay requests. I think that's a great idea. It was really helpful for District 7's requests. Can you share, not today, but when you get there, can you share that format and what the various portions of that fact sheet or one pager would look like in advance so that we can all kind of work from the same thing?
Madam Chair, yes. What we've done, what we usually do is I can give you the template that it's Sean actually made the template. He's the one that does the work. I'm not going to say I did it. Let's give credit where credit is due. but we can help with that, and we can, facilitate that. We mainly kind of focus with the main projects with the mayor. When I was talking more kind of like the booklet, how we're going to build that out, how we're going to we want to keep it as small again, because we think it was better used by the legislators. But yeah, when we have the templates, the one sheets and all of that stuff, we can work with you to create the QR codes and do those things for the projects that you really want to focus on. That's definitely something that we can help with.
Thank you. And my other question was just, I was looking at the list of capital outlay that we did receive, and looking at, what was funded fully versus what was funded tiny percentages. And were there any lessons learned, any analysis done on that for what are good types of projects to be looking at? What are the sweet spots in terms of how much we should be asking for? Definitely in District 7, we got, fully funded on quite a few of our small to middle sized requests. And so just system wide, was there any analysis done on that level that can tell us kind of what we should be thinking through for next year?
What I've learned, it's talking to them early and identifying stuff in early. And then when you show interest, if you get interest from other legislators, it's to let the legislators know that, hey, there's a lot of interest in this right now. So these are some projects that we look like we can fully fund. Another thing that did work with some legislators is to say, hey, in your district, an extra $50,000 actually gets this one off the ground, or $200,000 gets us off the ground. So that was helpful for some of them. We do know that some of the really, really big projects, it's difficult. Some of the legislators don't necessarily let you know what they're going to go with. And so it's kind of a hard thing to do. But I know that our lobbyist, Joe Thompson, has some other ideas and stuff like that. He's been doing this for a long time. So he can help with some suggestions as we move forward, or even right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Isaac. Yes, Madam Chair, I did do a debrief with the Legislative Finance Committee, some of our staffers that are focused on capital. And perhaps Councilor Bassan could even talk about this a little bit. But one of the things that we did see, and some of the specific feedback we got, was on projects where we're going in early, as Mr. Padilla was saying, but then also where we're able to articulate the big picture of the entire funding stream. So resources that are being brought by the city, other revenue streams or sources of funding, it really, really helps. And so that, I think, we have some examples where we've been able to do that. And I think as we push through the interim with that in mind, like, how do we tell this whole story? I think it really, really helps us. I can tell you the specific feedback from the LFC staff was Albuquerque is really unique. We do a really good job on capital outlay. We don't have a ton of projects that we're going back and getting reauthorized. We don't have a lot of money lying fallow, so to speak. So, compliments to everybody on this Zoom and working at the city, because I think we do a really good job. Obviously, we can always do better. So, and then the other thing, Madam Chair, if it's all right, I know we're talking specifically about capital, but I also did receive feedback on junior appropriations and transportation projects. Is it all right if I go with those now, or do you want me to stand for any other feedback or questions?
I didn't see any other questions on capital outlay, so we'll just go on to that agenda item. So go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so as everyone knows, like, the moving away from when you have this kind of budget surpluses, and they just came out recently and said they're going to have 500 million more than they even thought, a few months ago. So when you have those kind of surpluses, I think we can expect that it's going to be a good environment for us on capital projects. But one of the things we've seen the legislature do during these times is they will take piles of money and they'll do like a $50 million transportation package. It'll be the equivalent of a House Bill 2 Junior. This past year, they did Junior. And I know we worked with Mr. Griego in the mayor's office and some of the councilors on individual junior projects that might have been pushed through a legislator. So the junior projects look much like the individual discretionary capital projects, smaller amounts, but it would be, 100,000 for implementing some kind of a program or some kind of services. The pitfalls of junior is that money is not likely to be scored recurring. So it's like not something you'd staff up with, but in terms of maybe setting the tone on a certain type of program, there's merit in that type of activity. And I would encourage the council and the mayor's office to look at that from a more opportunistic way of like, are there some things we're trying to perhaps demonstrate for the state for maybe potential long-term recurring funding that we could utilize a junior approach with? This past session, it was kind of more haphazard, like you might have a 501c3 approaching a legislator or a counselor. And so maybe a little more structure or rigor to that would be appropriate, but I would leave that all up to you. That, and then as it relates specifically to transportation funding, I think there's going to be even more money going into transportation. And so one of the things that we've looked at is how do we take advantage of the fact now that we have a House Transportation Committee chair who's from Albuquerque, Representative Dayhockman Vigil. How do we put some of our projects front and center during the interim committee process so that they're in that queue for greater attention? Again, I would leave that up to you all, but I think there's tremendous opportunities with some of those things, and I would love to participate in helping figure out the best way for us to put our feet forward. I see Councilor Basana's hand raised.
Go ahead, Councilor Basan.
Madam Chair, so Mr. Thompson, when is a good time to start with junior bill lobbying? I guess I'm always behind, and all of a sudden I'm in my capital outlay mindset. And then I realize, oh shoot, but to me, they are very specific requests. It's not the same thing that we would be requesting for capital outlay. So, I mean, I feel like we should, or I should get better about doing it sooner rather than later.
Madam Chair and Councilor Bassan, I think you're right with the one exception that they typically don't say they're going to do a junior bill until they start to negotiate the budget. And then that's when it kind of is created. I think it's highly likely that there will be one going forward. So I think we should plan. The one thing that I've seen from the council and the mayor's office and the administration is flexibility. And so I think that this just needs to be part of that flexibility. If there's a junior opportunity, what do I have that I'd like to try and advance would be the sort of existential question I would ask if I were you. And so that if that opportunity presents itself, you'll be prepared.
Any other questions or comments on the junior bills?
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to go to Councilor Pena and then to Mr. Padilla.
It's just, I always have a hard time. Sometimes the raise hand is here and sometimes it's not. But anyway, I just want to ask either Isaac or Eric, do you know how much we received from the city for junior this past year, and how much went to the city and how much went to nonprofits?
I don't know that. Isaac, do you have or Libby might have a better number? I think we have estimates, but.
Libby might be on. Do you have that? I'm seeing if she's here.
I am here. So as far as junior numbers, I can follow up with our estimates, what we have as far as our closest numbers. There are some questions as to some of the projects that we're working with the state to confirm if they're if it's funding allocated to us versus other fiscal sponsors. So that's ongoing. I can follow up with those numbers.
Madam Chair, yeah, thank you. I would appreciate that. Do you have like a guesstimate in your head? I mean, is it 100,000? Is it 10? Is it 10 million? Is it 500? Do we get over $1 million in junior money?
Off the top of my head, I don't believe so. But
I think it's, Madam Chair and Councilor Pena, I believe it is right around $1 million. And for the reasons Miss Anaya is saying, there's like some very amorphous language. So the junior bill is not drafted by, it's actually drafted by legislative council. So it's not really an appropriations bill, even though it is. And so it's very amorphous in how it'll say like to Northwest Albuquerque for a wrestling program. I mean, it's like, who's that for, you know? And there'll be language that, and so what it requires is precision of going back to the sponsor and saying, what did you intend? And then they say, oh, I meant for this to go for X, Y, or Z. So there's some sleuth work that goes into it. I think if we are better prepared going into the session, we'll minimize that confusion, and we'll also be giving legislators better projects. I'm sorry, Councilor Pena, that may not have been exactly what you wanted.
Madam Chair, Joe, no, that was good information. Thank you. Libby, if you can just follow up and let us all know what we received, even if it's a rough estimate, and you can just write that on there so that we know. I know I was able to get some junior money this year, so I just didn't know as a city how much we were able to receive.
And just so I mean, I can't speak for sure, but I can tell you, so based on the rough numbers, I have a really gross draft spreadsheet, but I think we're at like 4.5 million total, and about a little over 1.5 million ish we think is City of Albuquerque.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
And the rest would be nonprofit.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Councilor, Madam Chair, there's just a couple examples. Were appropriations, the language we thought was ours, and even the couple legislators were not clear if it was the same nonprofit, for example, and one of them is significant, 250,000 or something. And so anyway, we're still tracking that down, and we'll make sure that we get with the legislators. So there's just a couple, and we can give you a more precise number. Libby's really trying to track a couple of those down too.
And Madam Chair, I will say one more thing with junior money. It appears that the governor's office vetoed capital that was going to the city. So I don't know if moving forward, when we're requesting junior money, if we might want to make sure it's still a little bit more operational or something like that. It was, I believe, about 250,000 for a park, or for a couple of parks. So that's something that we did notice when we were looking through the junior money.
Okay. I saw a couple of hands up, but they're all down. So if anybody has any other questions or comments, please raise your hand on this topic.
Madam Chair, I guess I'm sorry, but one last thing. I would say I would totally be willing to, at your direction, like have a working group for junior, and so we can be more like within the guidelines they released on junior. They did say, hey, this shouldn't be going for capital projects. Legislators obviously are going to do whatever they want to do anyway, but they do provide some guidance. So I think if we worked with the existing documents that they had, it might help us focus when we need to.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'd be interested in that, furthering that conversation as well, and also just coming up with some sort of, bulleted kind of ideas or rules that we can then share with other counselors as well, because I think that we don't do a great job on our end of like sharing the information that we learn from you all here with council. So if we had some of that in writing, I think that would be really helpful. Okay, any other comments? Junior bill? Okay, we're going to move on to Mr. Griego for the policy initiatives overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think you have on the attachments the overview, and we obviously there was a lot of bills that we were working on, but the bulk of them were around this Metro Crime Initiative. And despite some concerns early on that we weren't going to get a lot of that done, at the end of the day, our team, and it was credit to our to Mr. Jaramillo and our team, and Damon Martinez and a lot of folks who worked really hard. A lot of APD were up there trying to help. We had a pretty significant success around the MCI agenda. Obviously, HB 9. I think some of you were part of that conversation and celebration. Which was the Benny Hargrove Act, and that was a huge success. in terms of not just getting it done, but also working with the family and community. We got that organized retail crime bill done. That was questionable for a while. Body cameras, HB 368. I know that council had worked on a catalytic converter bill, and there was a supplemental bill that the legislature was also working on, SB 133. That passed. We were able to address some of the nuisance penalties so that our automatic speed enforcement system would be not only effective, but also comply with due process and so on with the for the hearing process. And then the biggest one probably, although it was more of an appropriation, was that warrant backlog bill, which I know our team worked really, really hard on. In the end, is going to be, we're going to continue to work on the implementation side. But the fact that in the budget bill in HB2, we got a significant investment into overtime for the warrant backlog, and we're currently working with the other partners, the DA and others, to make sure that we use that money effectively. So on the crime agenda, we actually did pretty well. There were a couple of bills, obviously, that didn't make it. The other pretty major victories were around metropolitan redevelopment, because both of these are pretty huge deal. And I know some of you worked hard on these. HB 353, which the team had an amazing effort on, working with UNM closely on the TID to help redevelop that UNM area. That's going to be a massive project in a key part of our city. And then the bigger one, we think, because we put a lot of effort into it, was SB 251, which is really going to create for all of the MRAs in the city and also MRAs all around the state. Our MRA office and our lobbying team really worked hard to get this, what is a major investment into redevelopment for the state MRA statute. And so we won't see any of this money for a while, but it's really going to make a difference, especially for councilors who have MRAs in their districts, and we've been trying to find ways to fund them. So that was a huge victory. So those were the big ones. I know there were some smaller ones. There was a lot of defense, and I know our team, Mr. Padilla and Mr. Adamillo and several others played a lot of defense, and we really dodged a bullet on that whole tax bill, where they were really going after some of our gross receipts revenues, and they really did a great job of working with the governor's staff and just making sure that we didn't take a big revenue hit there. And then I know, Madam Chair, there were a number of other initiatives that we were hoping passed, but just didn't make it through. And we can talk more about those either now or later if you'd like. But these were the kind of the big victories for us, and the major policy victories.
Thank you, Mr. Griego. I believe we had Mr. Jaramillo on the agenda to follow up on this topic, but I don't see him. So is there anything else anybody else would like to add on the policy wins and losses? Okay, we are going to move on to agenda item B. This is a status update for congressional directed spending grants. And I believe Mr. Parkinson is going to give us an overview first.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, councilors and members of the committee. I think I just wanted to first kind of yield to Eric and John to see if they wanted to provide anything before I got into the weeds with my presentation on this.
I'll turn it over to John and then to you, David, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody, if you haven't had a chance to meet David Parkinson, who's our new federal kind of funding coordinator, who's just doing a great job. His first week was literally the week that all of these things were due. And I know we were trying to keep all these balls in the air, and he just, despite preparing for his wedding, was made sure he did great follow-up. So as he'll explain in a minute, we actually did really, really well. And he'll be a regular staple on this call in the IGR to just make sure that we're not just working on with our delegation on federal earmarks, but also on the larger grant issue. But anyway, we just want to make sure everybody knows who he is, and we're really happy to have him on board. And he'll be working closely with Mr. O'Donnell and his team as well. So thank you so much.
Mr. Parkinson, go ahead. We'll go to you and then Mr. O'Donnell.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. And Eric, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Yeah, so like Eric was saying, when I started back mid-March, it was kind of right in the middle of things. I actually left the congressional office on the Friday and then came back, started Monday, and that's when all the deadlines were coming in. So it was kind of it was a rush, but we've got a lot of things in, and I'll be sharing my screen here in just a second. But I just want to say I do apologize, as the summary and spreadsheet that you all were sent, and Tom and I've worked with on this together. It's a little different than what I'll be sharing, and we'll be sending out the updated version after the meeting. And John and I were able to also have a nice long call today to sync up on our numbers and everything together. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So again, we'll move down to my first slide. So just wanted to start with the comparison of our FY24 earmark requests. And you've heard probably different phrases and terms for the two different types. There is the congressionally directed spending, or CDS, which is the Senate's version of earmarks. And then you have the CFPs, which is the House version, the community funded projects. So just to kind of give an overview, in FY23, there was 14 projects submitted, and this year we submitted a total of 22. And there's going to be a little bit of maybe confusing numbers. You'll see like total submissions, and that just sometimes we did duplicate submissions. So we may have submitted, for example, the ACS VIP request. We submitted to both, or all actually, Lujan, Heinrich, and Stansberry. So we kind of count those as three. So just didn't want to miss the work that both council did and our team did, just to kind of give you an idea of how many submissions we were doing. But yeah, this year, the mayor's office, we submitted 15 from our end. There's also a list in coordination with this committee that we submitted for three different projects. And city council service had 4 this year, but that's in coordination with some of the IGR. So it's kind of blend those together. Anyway, so that totaled to of submissions, that totaled to $51,464,000 in requests, which is about double from last year. And the projects that were submitted were accepted by the delegation and then submitted to the Senate, the subcommittee on appropriations. There was 15 unique projects. So that's 15 out of 22. Get in these numbers a little more, but otherwise what's funded in the appropriations bill and is TBD, right there. That hasn't been passed yet. We'll probably know, and John may speak more to this, probably know maybe later in the year. And that's when things will be kind of filtered down. But I like to put TBD, potentially we're looking at around a high of $22.5 million if everything were to get through, which is about double. And the total not funded are just projects that were not accepted. And there's a variety of reasons for those, but it's currently around 15 million. So we did ask for 51 million and about 15 so far. And those numbers don't exactly add up, and I can explain all that later. It's just got to do with the projects and submissions, but just to kind of keep it from being confusing with any of the numbers, just focus on the projects. But again, so the city together, all of us submitted 22 projects. Those unique projects, not as duplicate submissions, totaled to $41,964,000. And the submissions, just to break it down, to give you an idea, 29 of those submissions went to the Senate offices, with 19 going to Heinrich and 10 going to Lujan. Heinrich, being the senior senator of our delegation, is one of the reasons why we sent more to him. But additionally, the House, we sent 9 over there. The House was restricted. Each member was restricted, I believe, to 15 submissions to their committees through total for their entire district. So they had to be very careful on what they picked and chose, especially for members with larger districts, like Representative Vasquez. So with that, I'll just swing over to this column right. So about 70% of our projects were accepted. Again, that's that 22 million. I'll skip over this part, but this has got to do with the duplicates and the unique submissions and how much was duplicated. So just to kind of summarize by department what we were looking at, I just broke it down for you all to see the total number of submissions, which 22 again, majority being from Parks and Rec and APD, and then 1 and 2 here and there as well. So again, our final numbers coming out to 15 projects moving forward for this range here. And that range is because, for example, Senator Lujan may have submitted something for 500,000, while Heinrich may have submitted something for 1 million, and vice versa. So, and I just wanted to quickly categorize them to give you an idea. A little bit of guidance we received was a public safety lens does have a particular more bipartisan approach, especially in a divided Congress. So we pushed on public safety, the public safety angle, with 10 requests under that lens, that including AFR, emergency management, APD, and 8 of them were through. 2 were from regarding homelessness and housing, 2 from FCS, 1 did make it through. 8 public infrastructure. I just grouped our Parks and Rec, water infrastructure, rail, and a couple other things together. So 4 of those 8, and then 2 economic development projects. So you all have this. I'll just skip over this unique versus total submissions thing for now. And I just want to check my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything, but I'm open to questions, or John, Eric, if you guys would like to make any comments on anything I presented so far.
Are there any questions for Mr. Perkinson before we just go straight over to Mr. O'Donnell?
John, I think you're muted.
Okay.
I guess I have a question again.
I'm sorry, Councilor Pena, I did not see you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. My still raise hand function for sometimes it's on and sometimes it's off. But if you could put your chart back up, that first slide that you had.
Yeah, no problem.
So I just wanted to be clear. I think I got the gist of what you were saying, but then on here on the bottom it says total not funded. So, and it has FY23, FY24. So right now you're saying 15 million-ish is not funded, but we asked for potentially 22 to 21 that may be. So are we above or less than last year based on these numbers? I think, so you're saying we have had a total submission of 51 this year, potentially 21, 15. Oh, so that it's more then. So it's a little more.
Yeah,
okay.
thank you for,
just wanted to get the numbers in my head. You went by that slide and I didn't catch it all. So I think we're good. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor. Mr. O'Donnell, what do you have to add on this topic?
Madam Chairman, members of the committee. David mentioned, Mr. Parkinson mentioned earlier that he and I had a chance to compare reports this morning. I did send Eric Griego, Debbie O'Malley, Tom Menicucci, and David Parkinson a report earlier today, a two-pager, which basically lists, and this is what David and I discussed this morning, which basically lists the 15 projects that the congressional delegation submitted to the Appropriations Committee. And the total amount of funding is $22,564,000 for 15 projects. 5 of those projects, the Homeless Youth Center, the Technology Enhancement Tools, the Real-Time Crime Center, the Emergency Dispatch Assistance, and the Violence Intervention project. Those 5 were submitted as combined requests by either Senator Heinrich and Lujan, or Senator Heinrich and Congresswoman Stansberry. Congresswoman Stansberry submitted, and she was the first one, just in the way the timing works between the House and the Senate on appropriations activity. She submitted the $3 million request for the Youth Experiencing Homelessness Center. And this is the second year she's done that. So kudos to her for her efforts on that. Senator Heinrich submitted the same amount on the Senate side. The breakdown, and Mr. Parkinson touched on this, the breakdown in terms of where the appropriations requests went. And this is kind of interesting because of what it means for how these subcommittees operate with the special program accounts. So the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee, which is called THUD, received 5 what we call Economic Development Initiative requests. And that EDI funding comes out of the CDBG account. It's very popular, very competitive. So essentially 1/3 of the city's requests that were submitted come out of that particular account. The next account, same number, 5, went under the Commerce, Justice, Science subcommittee, and that's really where the Department of Justice programs are funded. The Small Business Administration, which comes under the Financial Services account, Senator Lujan made 2 requests under that subcommittee. And then one project is under Energy and Water Development Subcommittee, and that's the Pueblo Alto Stormwater. And the reason that you wouldn't see that on any web page, in this case, Senator Heinrich's, is because Senator Heinrich last year and this year requests a large amount of funding under an authority in a water resources bill that can fund projects like Pueblo Alto stormwater improvements. And this is a Corps of Engineers program. The city last week, a letter signed by Mr. Montoya, Pat Montoya, and Councilwoman Feeblecorn went to the Corps of Engineers, indicating to the Corps that this was a project, the Pueblo Alto stormwater improvements was a priority project for the city, and a request that the Corps include this project in its FY24 work program, which won't really get developed until after the FY24 appropriations bill is final and signed into law. Then there were 2 other earmark requests. One was under Labor HHS, and that was by Senator Lujan. And then there was one for Homeland Security. So there were essentially 6 subcommittees, 15 requests, a total of about $22.5 million. Roughly, and Mr. Parkinson and myself talked about this morning, roughly 7 million of that number goes to 3 projects that were specific to requests that the city council requested. The youth homeless, the Southwest Public Safety Facility, and Pueblo Alto. And then the balance were with the administration city departments. I think, I just want to say this. Yeah, I would say this. Senator Heinrich, and I think this is a repeat of what Mr. Parkinson was saying, Senator Heinrich had 6 requests that he handled alone. Senator Lujan had 4 requests of his own, and then there were 5 combined requests, either the 2 senators together or Senator Heinrich and Congresswoman Stansberry on the Youth Homeless Center. In listening to the report of both Mr. Thompson and Mr. Parkinson's, and hearing Eric Griego speak, what I was reminded of in putting together this report was what Mr. Griego and myself heard from Rebecca Vizia way back in January when we visited with her and the 3 other congressional offices that have representation of the city. Rebecca said, you know that our emphasis is on public safety. And when you look at the number of public safety requests here, I think it depends on how you want to count them. But in one way that I counted them, you have about 7 out of the 15 that are public safety. So she made that point. The other thing that Mr. Griego and myself learned, and we talked about this while he was here, is it was not a bad move to have a face-to-face conversation during January or in January with each of the congressional offices about earmarking. Because I think in each office, we were able to say a few things about the kind of programs that had been funded in FY23, and a little bit about just the general interest, not specifics, of what the city might have on a list or the areas that might be of interest to the city in FY24. So I reminded myself of this today before this report, because I want to suggest, as I heard you talking about capital outlay and the next legislative session in New Mexico, that we begin thinking about some of these things and putting together our program for the calendar year next year, FY24, but for the FY25 appropriation cycle. And Madam Chairman, I'm glad to answer any questions that the group might have.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Any questions for either Mr. O'Donnell or Mr. Parkinson or anyone else on the congressionally directed spending grants? I just had one, if not seeing anybody else. I know there were some of the requests that went in at the last minute that were kind of requests that came from the delegation, not from the city. But can somebody give us a little bit of information on how that last minute process worked? And if there's a way in the future that those last minute ones that are requested get shared with this committee in some shape or form, so I and the rest of the counselors and the rest of the members know that they're going in?
Madam Chair, I'll take a crack at it, and John can probably add some. So there were a couple of projects, and I'm sure there were others that I was not aware of either, that where delegation staff specifically said, we think, and I think it was Heinrich's office in particular, because their, senator sits on the appropriations committees, that there were maybe some missed opportunities, and would we submit something on a particular project where they thought there was a real good fit? In the end, I'm not sure if those got funded, but so it was very informal. It was staff to staff, and we were just trying to respond quickly. So Madam Chair, to your point, I think what we can do better next time is as soon as we get those requests in, whether that's David or John or any of us, to just make sure we kind of send it to the IGR committee to let them know, like, there's these last minute requests. Just to be really straight, it was all we could do to make sure we made all the deadlines. There was a lot of paperwork flying, and we were trying not to miss deadlines. So we certainly could probably be more communicative and balance that with the need to just get everything in and the letters in and everything. So that was my recollection. But John, I don't know if you had a different recollection. I know, David, and you may have also heard directly from some congressional staff, like, we have this opportunity, you really should put something in on this. And again, did it ultimately get funded?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Griego, yeah, this is a surprise. Let me put it that way. This is what happens. the council and the administration come up with a list, I think I'd go back to what I said earlier about Mr. Griego's and my conversation. Should I be calling you Mr. Griego or Mr. Montoya?
You should be calling me Dr. Griego Montoya, but only you, John.
All right, okay. Dr. Griego Montoya. I go back to our conversation with Rebecca Avizia back in January, because it was very clear to me when she was talking to us that, and this has happened in FY22, that I would be in contact with Ms. Anaya or or Mr. Seeley, and all of a sudden they would tell me, as they had just heard, that there had been a call or an inquiry from Senator Heinrich's office about a particular project. And I think, and this is, I don't know how this has also happened with the request that Senator Lujan has for the economic development for what I essentially say is minority business development. There were 2 appropriations requests. I think what does happen is there's some outreach or back channel conversations that people have, which are just part of government operations, and word gets to either congressional staff or to a member, and they say, why don't we look at this? Why don't we do something about this? We think, and of course, Mr. Heinrich, being on the Appropriations Committee, has some swag that, the rest of us don't have because he's on the committee. So I think that kind of brings into play these requests that come from, as Dr. Griego Montoya was saying, they come as a surprise to all of us. And some of you have heard in discussions that we've had, not in the formal committee, but when we're talking about the process, that I believe what we need to be prepared for in our work are the anywhere between 3 and 5 requests that might come our way that we don't know are out there, but are of interest to the congressional delegation. And the reason this also is going to happen more on the Senate side is because when you're limited, as Mr. Parkinson said earlier, when you're limited to 15 requests on the House side, you're not exactly out there prospecting for a lot of requests to come in. I don't know that there is a way to manage this other than to be prepared for it.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. So I'm not saying that we should not be prepared for unexpected requests. If the senator calls up and says we want to do something X, Y, or Z, we should do that. But it does put us in a weird position when we literally put in a request from the city of Albuquerque and the vice chair of IGR doesn't know that it was in. So when their staff calls to say, what do you think about the city of Albuquerque's requests? I don't know that, for example, there's one to help small businesses affected by climate change. So I don't mention it as a priority. I certainly would have had I known that it existed. And so all I'm asking for is a quick email, something that says, hey, these are the 5, 7, 24, I don't care, however many came in that we didn't talk about, so that we all just know what was requested under the name of the city of Albuquerque, so that we don't have the situation where we're kind of, not on the ball. That's all I'm asking. And so I'm not saying that there needs to be more process around doing that, just adding a thing at the end of the process of just to shoot an email to the IGR that says, here's the final list. No one's answering me, so I'm going to go with that's going to be our policy moving forward, and we'll go with that. Okay.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Mr. O'Donnell.
I'm good with that conclusion.
Thank you. All right, that's a new policy for IGR. I love it. All right, we're going to move on to item C on the agenda, the Federal Grants Initiative. And we are back to Mr. Parkinson.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. I spoke with Tom just really briefly this morning, and I would like to see if I could bump this presentation to the next meeting. There are currently a lot of grant initiatives we are working on, but I just want to give you a much more concise and comprehensive tracking list of what's going on within all the departments, instead of kind of like a little bit here, here, and here, and here. So if that would be all right with you all, I would kindly request that.
Seeing no objection, we will add that to the next agenda for the next meeting. I do think that Mr. Hertz is here and he had a little bit to say on this topic, so we'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I will keep my presentation pretty brief. I think I just want to give folks an update on some of our process, at least from the council side, when it comes to approaching federal grants. So with the council, we have a grant consultant, Nicole Taylor, who has been pretty proactive, in terms of scanning federal grants that are popping up, and with direction from certain counselors, Nicole flags certain bills, or I'm sorry, not bills, certain grants that she thinks that the council might be interested in pursuing. And then Nicole and I work with individual departments in order to kind of assess, the feasibility of going after those grants. We've done pretty well over the I don't know how long now. It's probably been close to a year we've been doing this, and we've successfully gone after a few grants. One with, just to give a few examples, one with Senior Affairs for COVID vaccine clinics, and another one we recently submitted was for the choice grant through HUD. And so, I think there's not really a formalized process for doing that. And I think maybe that's where this committee can have some discussion surrounding that. But I know for a while now, we've all been discussing a more strategic approach to going after federal grants. But just wanted to give a quick update on that and how Nicole and I are pursuing these grants and then working with individual departments and their staff in order to pursue those grants. And so I stand for any questions that you guys have on that.
Thanks, Mr. Hertz. Mr. O'Donnell, do you have a question or a comment?
Madam Chairman, I had something else to say, but I would like to ask Jeff a question about, because this is always of concern to us here, Kyriakis and myself, when we send grant notices to the city. So you characterize you and Nicole as discuss if there's a grant opportunity that looks like it would be something that fits with the city's program, that you would reach out to departments to discuss the practicality of the grant and whether they have the capacity to do it. Am I correct?
Yes, that's typically the case. Sometimes we reach out to departments and some of these grants are already on their radar. So I think, like I say, it's been pretty informal process for doing so. But I know that Nicole and Tom and I receive your notifications about grants and kind of scan through those. But I think Nicole is also doing a scan kind of on her own as well. And just trying to keep, when doing so, we keep the counselors and their particular lenses in mind. And so it's, like I say, it's pretty informal for now, but if we would like to develop a more formal process, I think, that's up for discussion, of course.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, may I continue?
Of course.
This is an area of federal grants that is always a concern to us because of the fit between what we see and the readiness for the city to be able to take advantage of an opportunity. I want to mention, first of all, because we work with a number of local governments, not all of them, and other entities which are not local governments, but special authorities. So we do a lot of different types of grant work. And at any time in this process, if we can be of some assistance to either Mr. Parkinson or Mr. Hertz in discussing how the grant operation can work effectively or more effectively, we're certainly available to do that. Because of the infrastructure bill that passed, and then our the legislation to deal with the other impacts of inflation, Kyriakis and I discussed this idea of maybe we needed to bolster our ability to respond to especially stuff in the transportation area. And I think I've mentioned this before in IGR meetings, but I'll mention it again. We have two people. One, Robert Mariner, who used to work for several administrations in the Secretary's office, who was the top staff person that managed the traffic, the grant traffic, when it got to the Secretary's office for decision-making about raised grants, Tiger grants, infra grants, aviation grants, safety grants. So we've been working with him and making him available to clients. The other person is a fellow named Chris Newman, who was with the Federal Highway Administration here in Washington, but also worked in the Sacramento office of the Federal Highway Administration. Very capable person with a great deal of programmatic information, but also as a specialist in the environmental area and did training for federal highways in their state offices. And I'll say this, we just recently used him on a discussion that had to do with COVID, because as some of you may know, the state of New Mexico's DOT worked with Bernalillo County, the town of Bernalillo, I think Mr. Cog, and there was one other, the city of Rio Rancho, because as of a week ago, when the legislation was going to pass to claw back COVID money, some of the COVID money that was going to get clawed back was available to state highway departments and local governments as part of the COVID funding. And we had Mr. Newman working with us, talking to several entities who were in a position to lose funding. And he helped us, he explained to us some of the nuances, but we had conversations with people engaged with New Mexico DOT and Caltrans about how to protect or get rid of the money that was sitting there. And so what happened in New Mexico is those entities that I mentioned, NMDOT took the money that was available to those local governments for projects and is reprogrammed it to things that they could obligate that money to immediately. I mention this because we do have this kind of capacity available to you. And as we get into, because there's still a lot of transportation money on the table, I want to make sure that you're aware of this and we use it to your benefit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. I knew about that first resource, but I did not know about the second. So we'll make sure that we remember that as we move forward on conversations. I've been having a couple conversations with the state around some of that infrastructure money. So good to know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, comments on any of the federal grant initiatives? Not, we're going to move on to our report from federal lobbyists. If there's anything that you want to add on top of all that we've already talked about, Mr. O'Donnell, now would be a good time.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, you know, and I sent a brief summary to folks about what was in the debt limit legislation. And a couple of the things that were certainly of concern to local governments and state governments was taking back CARES and ARPA money, which did not happen. The reference I was making to the highway funding was in another piece of coronavirus legislation. That's the money that Congress, by passing this law, was taking back. There is an interesting element that was stuck in that debt limit legislation, and it requires, and we'll see how well they do on this, it will require Congress to cut the appropriations bills in FY24 and FY25 by 1% if they do not pass an appropriations bill before the end of the year. Now, the end of the year for them, fiscal year, is September 30th, but this legislation says if they don't have a bill passed by December 31st, they have to make a cut 1% in discretionary funding. It's interesting to note it's not a 1% cut also in defense spending. It's just domestic discretionary spending. The appropriations process has started in the House. 2 weeks ago, they finished markup of 4 bills: agriculture, military construction, and VA. That's 1 bill. Agriculture, Homeland Security, and the legislative branch. Legislative branch is really Congress funding itself. But they stopped after they marked these bills up in subcommittee. They did not go to full committee because they didn't want to do that before the debt limit negotiations were completed. Now, what they've done, and again, this is in the report that we sent, but basically they set the top line spending numbers for FY24 and FY25. The importance of that is basically we're not going to have this game going on of no budget resolution from either the House or the Senate. The appropriators basically know what their numbers are for 24 and 25. And in 24, defense gets 886 billion, and non-defense discretionary gets 703 billion. Now, with that in place, these appropriators can start doing what they do at this stage, and that's allocate to subcommittees about how much money they're going to have to spend in each subcommittee. There's a glitch, though, and that is there are 11 Tea Party members who still continue to have concerns that they think that the spending limit for FY24 should have been set at FY22 levels. And they're raising some heck with Mr. McCarthy about that. That'll get sorted out here in the next week or two. But those kind of numbers, in other words, going back to 22, that's not going to happen over on the Senate side. They'll proceed with what's in the debt limit agreement. And then they'll have to negotiate that in conference. So I think that's basically all there is to add to what's going on with appropriations and debt limit. We expect to see these bills move. They've got 3 weeks this month and 3 weeks next month before they go out of session in August for the entire month and then come back in September. I wouldn't expect all the bills to be marked up in full committee. Usually Labor HHS always has some policy riders that slow that legislation down. But with this deadline of getting it done by the 31st of December, I would expect to see the bills done by that time. I would add one more thing, and it's an aside to all of this, but it's a statement about how this government works. There was an article in the New York Times this weekend about McCarthy and the kind of leadership he exhibited in getting this debt limit bill done. No matter what you think of the bill, what the New York Times reporter was saying is that McCarthy behaved like speakers of the House have behaved in the past in terms of recognizing that a deal needs to get done. The article didn't talk about Mr. Biden in its headline, but what it also said about Biden is, here you have another person of 37 years experience who knows how to make things get finished. And the two of them, to their credit, managed to get this thing done. And so I think it's some encouragement to people here who observe this stuff closely that you saw this system working the way it ought to work. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Mr. Padilla.
Yeah, I got a real quick question. You had said that if the appropriation committees, is it the appropriations, like all the appropriations go through? And if they don't go through, there's going to be a 1% reduction? Or let's say that ag makes it through, commerce makes it through, and energy makes it through, but like some of the other ones don't. Does that mean that those three that made it through will not have that cut, but the other ones will?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Padilla, yes, they have to have one appropriations bill, all 12 bills done. That's what it means.
Would that include?
It's not individual. They have to have all 12 bills wrapped into one FY24 appropriations bill for the president to sign.
Could they wrap that into an omnibus bill? Or are they expecting all 12 bills to actually make it through the process?
They could do that. They have to have an appropriations bill done on December 31st. Yes, it could be a wrap up omnibus.
Would you be expecting a continuing resolution then, more than likely to get closer to that date? And could they put writers on the CR if they wanted to?
Well, you will probably find, because I don't think they'll have it done by September 30th, so we'll have to have continuing resolutions that will get us through until they do, or till that deadline of December 31st, because we're going to go September 30th to December 31st in a new fiscal year. So there may be some CRs.
Thank you.
More drama.
All right, not seeing any other hands. Did want to figure out the next meeting. We are going back, I believe, to our monthly meeting schedule. So by my calendar, that puts us on July 5th. Is that right, Mr. Minicucci?
Yes, Madam Chair. And I guess with that being right after a holiday, my question is, will we have a full committee here? I don't know if you want to check with the committee what their plans are.
Okay, Dr. Griego Montoya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was mostly just to giving John O'Donnell a hard time. Madam Chair, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew. I know most of you have already met and or know Debbie O'Malley, who will be beginning on the 16th, which was my last day, the Mayor's new Associate Chief of Staff for Policy, including sitting as the voting member on this committee. We'll make sure we get that transmitted from the Mayor and Lawrence directly. But so I won't be with you in future meetings, but Debbie and I are still doing some transitions. So if there's anything that we should talk about before I leave, please try to catch me before the 16th. And just really appreciate all your work on this committee and work together, and look forward to working with you a little bit more before I leave. But Debbie will be the voting member in my place for our next meeting.
Thank you and welcome. I want to call you Commissioner O'Malley. I can't say it other way. So welcome to the committee, and we look forward to working with you. Do the rest of the members of the committee have a preference on that July 5th versus moving it another week out?
Madam Chair, I will be on vacation that week, but yeah, that's just me. So I don't know everybody else's.
Do we want to just cancel the July meeting since all our meetings will be canceled, or?
I am game for that as well, Counselor, whatever the preference is. I'm seeing a lot of smiles to that suggestion. So let's go with that. We will go. So our next meeting would be the first Wednesday of August.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, other than, I think Mr. O'Donnell has his hand up, so maybe he has some objections.
No,
Mr. O'Donnell, sorry, I didn't see you.
No, I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I don't have any objection to whatever you're going to do on the 5th or not, but I did want to mention that Kyriakis and I will be in Albuquerque at the end of the month, the 27th, 28th, and 29th. And so I'm giving you fair warning that we'll be there and looking to set up appointments with you, which we'll be working on, with the exception of Dr. Is it Griego Montoya? Yes, yeah, with the exception of him. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. O'Donnell. Yeah, let's get those scheduled soon. That's those counselors last week before time off, so I'm guessing their calendars look kind of like mine. But I would love to make sure I get to spend some time with you guys. So
Thank you.
Let us know when you're available and let's get those scheduled.
Okay, thank you.
Any other business?
Yeah, Madam Chair, real quickly on the schedule of Wednesday, it's still, it was Wednesday this week, this meeting because Mr. Rael's schedule, because we were just kind of getting a meeting in place because we had a hiatus. Last year, we had put them on every Tuesday instead of every Wednesday because Wednesdays can sometimes coincide with some committee meetings that occur. So I don't know if you want to stay with Wednesday in the afternoon or if you want to move it to Tuesday like we did last year, just as a.
I did not remember that, so clearly I have no preference. Does anybody else on the committee have a Tuesday or Wednesday preference? I feel like this time worked well. I wouldn't mind just keeping it on Wednesday.
Madam Chair, moving forward, I just, in the long term of things, and I realize this could change next year, but I would think Tuesday might be a little better for those that serve on LUPs, depending on how that works with everybody's calendars. I don't know if they would conflict or not.
Well, LUPS generally starts at 5, so it,
but that's a long
briefings and
section of
stuff,
meetings,
yeah.
but it's up to, I just wanted to point that out.
We can move to Tuesdays. I just cannot do Tuesdays at 2.
And Madam Chair, I don't sit on LUPs, so I'm not affected by it. I just wanted to
and I don't think Councilor Pena does either. I'm not seeing any preference. I'm okay with Wednesdays. Tuesdays is hard for me. So not seeing anybody frowning too heavily. Let's just keep it on the first Wednesday at the same time, and we'll meet the first Wednesday of August.
Will do.
Madam Chair, I just ran through the quick calendar and I didn't notice any, based on a real quick looking at it, I don't think it'll interfere with LUPs in case any of you do end up on LUPs.
Well, I chair LUPs, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. So, okay. Any other business? I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for your time, and I'll see you in 2 months.